I woke up with sand in my mouth and the smell of rotting fish in my nose. The sky above me was the wrong color, too bright, too clean, no smog, no planes, no city hum. Just wind, waves, and 40 people staring down at me like I was something the ocean had coughed up, which apparently I was. My real name is Chen Wei. 28 years old software engineer. Last thing I remembered was a power outage, a server rack falling, and the very specific feeling of dying on a Tuesday. Now I was lying on a beach that smelled like the end of the world, inside the body of a 17-year-old boy, in a fishing village so small it didn't even have a name. The year was somewhere around 200 BC, give or take a century. The village had 63 people. 63 people, 11 rotting boats, 0 metal tools, and a fishing catch so poor that 3 children in the village had the swollen bellies of the slowly starving. The body I had taken over belonged to a boy named Hai. He had drowned the day before, fell from a boat in a storm, and by some cosmic accident I had arrived just as his heart decided to start again. The villagers thought it was a miracle. The elder, an old woman named Mazu with a jaw like carved driftwood, said the sea god had returned his soul. I didn't argue. Being thought of as divine was not the worst position to start from. But the truth was simple. These people were dying, not dramatically, not all at once, just slowly the way fires die when no one feeds them, a little less food each season. A few more children who didn't make it through winter. The fish were moving further from shore, the boats were falling apart, and nobody knew how to fix any of it. They had been fishing the same way for 100 years, and it had stopped working 50 years ago. I had 6 months before winter. If I didn't change something, this village wouldn't survive to see spring. So, where do you start when you're trying to save an ancient civilization with nothing but memories from a 21st century life? You start with salt. The village had no salt trade. They scraped it off rocks when the tide was low, a miserable, inconsistent method that left them with barely enough to preserve a single season's catch. I walked the coastline for a full morning, the elder's suspicious eyes on my back the whole time. Everyone thought I was still recovering from the drowning. That was fine. I needed time to think anyway. I found what I was looking for, a flat, shallow basin of rock just above the high tide line. Natural, nearly perfect. If I could channel seawater in and let the sun do the rest, I could produce salt in quantities this village had never seen. I went to the elder that evening. She was sitting outside her hut mending a net that was more hole than net. I told her I knew how to make salt, enough to fill 10 jars in one moon cycle. She looked at me the way you look at someone who has recently almost drowned, patient, unconvinced. I told her, let me show you, and if I'm wrong, I'll do whatever work you assign for a full season without complaint. She studied me for a long time. Then she nodded once slowly, the way old people agree to things they're already sure will fail. I had 5 days to prove myself. I recruited 4 people. A teenage boy named Gull who never stopped moving, 2 women named Prawn and Cord who were the strongest workers in the village, and a quiet, watchful man named Stone who said almost nothing, but understood everything the first time you showed him. We spent 2 days digging channels from the rock basin to the sea. We lined them with flat stones to slow the flow. The idea was simple. Seawater enters the basin during high tide. The channel gate, a flat stone I could slide in or out, controls the water level. And the shallow basin lets the sun evaporate the water slowly, leaving salt crystals behind. The rest of the village watched us with the polite skepticism of people who have seen many things not work. On the 3rd day, I showed them the first crust of white crystals forming along the basin edges. Gull dropped to his knees and stared at it like it was a miracle. I told him to stand up. We had more basins to dig. By the 5th day we had enough salt to fill 2 clay jars. Not 10, I had overestimated the sun's intensity in autumn, but 2 jars was still more than this village had seen produced in a single week in living memory. The elder came to look at it. She touched the crystals with one finger, put it to her tongue, and was quiet for a long time. Then she called the whole village together and told them that Hai had come back from the sea with knowledge in him that was not his own. Nobody argued with that. But not everyone was pleased. The village had a fisherman named Kelp. He was 40, broad-shouldered, and had been the most respected man in the village before I arrived, the best net caster, the one who knew the tides. The man whose opinion the elder had always asked first. Now everyone was talking about the salt basins, about Hai, about what else the returned boy might know. Kelp came to me on the 6th morning while I was checking the basin levels. He was friendly about it, and that was the warning sign. He said he was glad the salt was working. He said the village needed strong men, not just clever ones. He said, and this part he said with a smile, that a boy who had nearly drowned should probably not be spending so much time near the water. I looked at him steadily. I said, you're right. I do need strong men. In fact, I was hoping you'd help me with the next project. He blinked. He hadn't expected that. I told him I wanted to build a fish weir, a fence of stakes across the mouth of the river that flows behind the village. Fish swimming downstream would be funneled into a trap. We could catch 5 times what the boats catch in a day without leaving shore. I needed the strongest man in the village to drive the stakes. It was flattery, it was transparent flattery, and it worked exactly the way transparent flattery always works on people whose ego is bigger than their suspicion. Kelp agreed. I had turned my first enemy into a tool, not permanently, but for now it was enough. The fish weir took 3 days to build. Sharpened stakes hammered into the riverbed, woven together with split reeds, creating a V-shaped fence with a basket trap at the narrow end. On the first morning we checked the trap, there were 40 fish in it. 40. Before the weir, a good day for the whole village fleet was 30. The children ran to the river to see. Old women who hadn't moved quickly in years walked to the bank and looked at the fish trap with expressions I can only describe as wonder. Kelp stood beside me and stared at the catch. He was quiet for a long time, then he said, and I could hear the effort it cost him, that it was a good design. I thanked him for driving the stakes. Without his strength, I told him the current would have shifted the whole structure. He nodded, he didn't smile, but something in him relaxed. That night the village ate until they were full for the first time in months. I sat near the fire and let the noise of people eating wash over me. 2 inventions in less than 2 weeks. Salt production and a fish weir. Small things, ancient things, nothing that wouldn't be discovered eventually without me. But time is the most important resource any civilization has. I was giving them decades ahead of schedule. I was just getting started. On the 20th day, a trading boat arrived. It was larger than anything our village owned. 3 men on it, well-fed and armed, representing a merchant called the Red Sail Company, a trading network that moved between coastal settlements, buying fish and salt at whatever price they chose, and selling grain and bronze tools at whatever price they could get away with. In other words, they were a monopoly, and a brutal one. The lead trader was a man named Tung. He had a pleasant face and the eyes of someone who had spent his entire life calculating how little he could offer and how much he could take. He inspected our salt jars with great theatrical admiration. Then he offered us 1 bronze needle per jar. 1 needle for enough salt to preserve 100 fish. The elder looked at me. I kept my face calm. I told Tung we were not selling today, we were still calculating our stock. He could return in a month. Tung's pleasant face did something small and unpleasant. He said that the Red Sail Company was the only buyer on this coast, and if we waited a month, the price might be lower. I told him that was fine, we would wait. He left. The elder waited until the boat was out of sight, then turned to me and said very quietly that Tung was not a man who accepted refusals. I knew. I had 1 month to make us powerful enough that his refusal of us would hurt him more than it would hurt us. The next 3 weeks were the hardest of my new life. I taught Stone how to make a simple pottery kiln, a pit lined with stones, packed clay around a fire. It took 7 failed batches before we got clay jars that didn't crack. Stone said nothing each time one broke. He just cleared the pieces and started again. That man was worth more to me than anyone I had ever managed in my previous life. I redesigned the fishing nets. The old ones were knotted too loosely, fish slipped out easily. I showed them a tighter weave pattern using a bone needle I carved myself. The women took to it faster than anyone. Prawn could produce a net in half the time the men could with twice the quality. I made her the net workshop supervisor. Kelp didn't like that. I built a smoking rack above a controlled fire pit to preserve fish properly. The salt from the basins now had a partner, extending the preservation time from days to weeks. For the first time in generations, the village had surplus, salt they didn't need for themselves, fish they couldn't eat fast enough, and clay jars to store them in. When Tung returned at the end of the month, I had 12 jars of high-quality salt, 200 smoked fish, and a calm expression waiting for him. This time I quoted him the price. Tung did not take it well. He had brought 6 men this time, armed. He walked through our village like he owned it, which in a way he had always assumed he did. He looked at the salt basins. He looked at the smoking racks. He looked at the pottery kiln and the new nets drying in the sun. His pleasant face went through several expressions and settled on something cold. He told me, a 17-year-old boy in a village of 63 people, that we had made a mistake by becoming too useful. That useful things attracted attention. That attention from the wrong people was dangerous. He told me we would hand over half our salt stock as payment for the Red Sail Company's protection. Protection from what? I asked. He smiled. From whatever might happen to a small village with no walls and a suddenly interesting supply of salt. The 6 armed men behind him were not subtle about what he meant. Every person in the village was watching. The elder stood at the edge of the crowd. Kelp stood behind me. For once, I was glad of his presence. I felt the fear moving through the crowd. These were not warriors. These were fishermen and net weavers and children. If Tung's men decided to take what they wanted, there was nothing to stop them. But I had been waiting for this moment, because I had known it was coming. You don't build something valuable in this world without someone trying to take it. I had spent part of the last 3 weeks preparing for it. I told Tung I understood his concern. I told him protection was a serious matter and he was right to raise it. Then I told him what I knew about the Red Sail Company. I had spent 3 weeks talking to every trader and traveler who came near our village, gathering information the way I used to gather data for quarterly reports. Tung's company operated along 40 coastal settlements. They had a monopoly, but monopolies have a weakness. The moment an alternative supplier appears, the whole structure collapses. I told Tung that I had already sent word, through a fisherman who traded with 2 settlements up the coast, that we would be happy to discuss direct salt supply arrangements with any village that wanted to bypass the Red Sail Company's fees.